The Guyana Elections Commission has not yet officially announced the results of the general elections held on March 2nd. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to extend existing sanctions on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea for another year. At least 13 people were killed in a landslide in Ivory Coast on Thursday, which caused extensive damages to homes and railway infrastructure. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Guyana, where the Elections Commission has not yet officially announced the results of the general elections held on March 2nd. A notice of motion was filed in the Court of Appeal and served on the chairperson and chief elections officer. According to the motion, the Commission has failed to determine a final credible count and/or the credibility of the result. The case was filed in the name of Esling David. GEOCOM spokesperson Yolanda Ward said that the notice of motion restrains the chief elections officer Keith Lowenfield from presenting his report on the results, which was due to take place this Thursday. The Court of Appeal will on Friday hear the motion filed to block the declaration of the results. All provinces in Cuba except for Havana and Matanzas this Thursday entered Phase 1 of the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions. The Ministry of Public Health confirmed that 13 provinces and the special municipality of the Isle of Youth have not reported any new positive cases for the last 15 days. On Monday, Prime Minister Manuel Marrero Cruz stressed that the transition to the new stage will be a gradual process that will consider the unique circumstance of each province. Preventative measures remain in effect. And Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel emphasized that the country's capital and the province of Matanzas, home to one of the nation's main tourist resorts, must redouble their efforts in order to enter the post-pandemic recovery stage.
We ask Havana and Matanzas to understand they have a group of particularities because they are the center of the pandemic at the moment. Therefore, they have to maintain the situation that has been in place until now. They have to strictly maintain all the restrictions. I would even say that in the midst of these conditions, we must increase control to prevent the relaxation of the measures and to prevent the capital and the province of Matanzas from taking a longer period of time to overcome the pandemic stage and enter the recovery stage.
According to Chile's central bank, the country is set to face its worst economic crisis in 35 years. The Economic Policy Report for June 2020 notes that the Chilean economy will shrink by 5.5 to 7.5% this year. The central bank report reveals there has been a significant rise in unemployment and a reduction in income for workers, which has heavily impacted the economy. Authorities also note that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a fall in domestic consumption. And also in Chile, coffin manufacturers are boosting production twice or 3 times over in a bid to keep pace with demand amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The Burgot coffin factory in the capital, Santiago, normally makes 50 coffins a week. It's now making more than 100. Chile has reported more than 225,000 coronavirus cases, the 9th highest number in the world. The COVID-19 death toll stands at more than 3,800. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro chaired a meeting on Thursday to review the progress on construction works for public infrastructure nationwide. As part of the Venezuela Bella mission, healthcare facilities, roads and highways have been restored. Among them are the delivery rooms at the Uyapa Hospital in Bolivar State and Las Delicias Avenue and 72nd Street in Maracaibo City. The Venezuelan government also completely restored the San Francisco Church in Caracas, which was handed over to religious authorities on Thursday. And Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez reported 46 new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases and 51 imported cases from Colombia and Brazil this Thursday. Meanwhile, President Maduro requested an extension of restrictions in the border states with Colombia and Brazil and to up lockdown measures in Caracas and other heavily affected Venezuelan states. This Thursday, the Venezuelan government presented new evidence on opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido's links to the illegal seizure of Venezuela's assets abroad by the US government.
It is a criminal corporation that is aimed at undermining the interests of Venezuela, as we have demonstrated on previous occasions, to seize the financial assets of our country, to take over our companies abroad. Do not think that all of frozen assets abroad are in frozen accounts. Oh no. Many of them have already been transferred to the accounts of the U.S. Federal Reserve, a vulgar plundering of Venezuela's resources.
Brazilian police have arrested a long-standing friend of President Jair Bolsonaro in connection with a corruption inquiry involving Bolsonaro's son. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Meir, brings us more details.
This morning, a group of officers from Rio de Janeiro State Civil Police's Guyana Organized Crime Task Force raided a home in the countryside of São Paulo and arrested Fabricio Queiroz, driver and cabinet member to Flávio Bolsonaro when he served as a state congressman for over a decade in Rio de Janeiro. Queiroz first made the news in 2018 when he became the target of an investigation for money laundering. According to police investigators at the time, Queiroz had passed over R$1 million in small amounts of money in transfers to members of the Bolsonaro family. Since that moment, Queiroz has been in hiding, and one of the rallying cries in all of the anti-Bolsonaro protests in 2019 was, "Where is Queiroz?" Queiroz is suspected of being the point man between the Bolsonaro family and the Escritores do Crime paramilitary militia that was headed by Antonio Nóbrega, whose mother and girlfriend were also long-time staff members in Flávio Bolsonaro's cabinet. And the thing that people are most interested in finding out is what kind of involvement the Bolsonaro family had in the assassination of City Councilwoman Marielle Franco in 2018. Queiroz's arrest has to have members of the Bolsonaro family very uncomfortable today. As Abraham Weintraub, one of Bolsonaro's star cabinet ministers, resigns as Secretary of Education today, one has to wonder if Bolsonaro himself isn't wondering if his days are numbered.
And the Brazilian government's push towards fascism was exposed in a cabinet meeting in which Finance Minister Paulo Guedes called for a Nazi-style volunteer youth labour force, while Education Minister Abraham Weintraub urged the president to arrest Supreme Court justices. Once again, our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Meir, brings us the details.
Many Brazilians are furious over a video of a presidential cabinet meeting released by the Supreme Court last Friday, which shows ministers goading President Bolsonaro further towards fascism.
Do gymnastics, sing the national anthem, salute, study citizenship in the afternoons, discipline, use the time constructively, use volunteers to build the highways, to do this and that.
Bolsonaro's education minister Abraham Weintraub has already drawn criticism for speeches in which he simply exchanges the word communists for Jews in passages lifted directly from Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf.
The communists are at the top of the nation. They are at the top of the financial organizations. They are the owners of the newspapers. They are the owners of the big corporations. They are the owners of the monopolies.
During the cabinet meeting, Minister Weintraub, whose failed plan to gut the public university system drew millions of protesters to the streets in 2019, called on the president to start arbitrarily arresting non-allied government officials.
The people are crying for freedom. I think this is what we are losing here. The people want to see what brought me here. If it were up to me, I would throw all these bombs in jail, starting with the Federal Supreme Court.
The anger continues to grow. For the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic began, Bolsonaro was forced to flee from protesters during a public outing in Brasilia the day after the video was released. Brian Meir, Telesur, São Paulo.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so stay with us. Ordered to extend existing sanctions on a Democratic People's Republic of Korea for another year. The document describes North Korea as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the US and reiterates the national emergency alert that was declared in 2008. The executive order, which was further expanded under Trump and previous administrations, calls for sanctions on North Korea for its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. And the US government continues to meddle in China's internal affairs, with the latest move being the signing into law by President Donald Trump of the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, which authorizes sanctions against Chinese officials.
I think that this comes at a time when the United States is very much suffering based on its response to the COVID-19 crisis, which has been seen as a tremendous failure. And this failure is kind of exposed how flawed the United States and its model of politics is. Now, unfortunately, the United States responded to this by, instead of fixing the problems that are inside the United States, has responded by externalizing the problem, trying to create worse situations for other countries rather than fixing its own internal problems. Now, with Xinjiang, we've seen that the United States is happy to support things like religious extremism, terrorism, or ethnic separatism, as long as these things happen outside of the United States, and as long as they're happening to countries that the United States doesn't control or influence. So if any country dares to exercise its sovereignty and do anything about problems like this, just like China has, and just like other countries do, the United States threatens a lot of consequences for this. The very fact that the United States passes laws in its Congress about the internal affairs of other countries shows that the United States has no respect for the rights of other nations' sovereignty.
The coronavirus pandemic has taken its toll on restaurants in the Chinese capital. Last week, traces of COVID-19 were found on salmon chopping boards at the Xinfadi wholesale market in Beijing. Since then, the city's restaurants have been dealing with a gloomy economic outlook, as many are heavily reliant on seafood from the market. The entire food service industry in the city has been impacted by the new outbreak, traced back to the market. While some restaurants in Beijing remain open to the public, customers have also become cautious of the risk of contracting the virus when dining out.
I will not dine out.
I guess I will not dine out. I am in Shaowan district and I don't know the results, like how many people in this area get infected. And I may touch this virus from the table or something. If this goes on beyond July, we might not be able to carry on.
Japan has lifted travel restrictions within the country and said it is in discussions to allow some travel from Vietnam, Thailand, Australia and New Zealand.
Starting tomorrow, we will raise the socio-economic activity by another step. In detail, there will no longer be any prefectural travel restrictions, including for the capital region, Tokyo and surrounding prefectures, and Hokkaido. Concerts and other events may also be held with limited attendance and occupancy rates.
Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi warned on Thursday during a visit to the Palestinian territories that the Israeli annexation plan in the occupied West Bank poses an unprecedented danger to the region.
The issue of annexation is an unprecedented danger to the peace process. If annexation occurs, it will kill the two-state solution and destroy all the foundations on which the peace process was based. And this will deprive all the people of the region of their right to live in security, peace and stability. Preventing annexation is protecting peace. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan will continue to put every effort possible and to support its brothers, the Palestinians, and achieve a comprehensive and fair peace that will protect the region from the consequences of a long and painful conflict if Israel annexes a third of the occupied West Bank.
Children have gone back to school in northwest England in an environment of reduced class sizes, social distancing and non-sharing of resources to minimise the risk of spreading the novel coronavirus. Schools in the north of England have been slower to reopen than in the rest of Britain due to coronavirus concerns. Hundreds of paediatricians have signed an open letter to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, urging him to reopen schools or risk scarring the life chances of children. However, many parents have decided to keep their children at home, and teachers' unions have stressed that the conditions for reopening need to be made safe. The UK government closed schools in March as part of the coronavirus lockdown measures. Ministers in England said around 600,000 children are now back at school. The German government has urged the European Union to reach a recovery agreement by the end of July in order to boost the economy following the coronavirus pandemic. German Chancellor Angela Merkel recommended a €750 billion recovery plan on Thursday. The economic package includes €500 billion in grants and €250 billion in loans. Meanwhile, negotiations are expected to be tough, as some EU member states have already shown opposition to the proposal. Germany is set to chair the EU presidency in July in the midst of the region's deepest ever economic recession triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Russian Health Ministry released a statement informing that clinical trials for a COVID-19 vaccine started on Wednesday. Two different forms of the vaccine developed by the Moscow-based Gamaleya Research Institute, one liquid and the other powder, will be tested on two groups of volunteers of 38 people each. The participants will be isolated in two Moscow hospitals. Anna Popova, head of Russia's Federal Consumer Rights and Human Wellbeing body, said she hoped the vaccines would be first of all safe and secondly effective. There are at least 7 Russian research facilities currently working on COVID-19 vaccines. And we're taking one last and very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. At least 13 people were killed in a landslide in Ivory Coast on Thursday, which caused extensive damages to homes and railway infrastructure. Following days of torrential rains, the landslide occurred in the city of Abidjan. According to Ivorian authorities, 10 people were taken to hospitals and 20 homes were completely destroyed. Meanwhile, rescue teams continue to search for missing people. The rainy season in Ivory Coast starts in early May and runs through July. Thousands of Tunisian health workers have marched in the streets of the capital, Tunis. The massive demonstration is part of a general strike across all public hospitals to demand reforms in the health sector, especially as the coronavirus outbreak has infected more than 1,000 people and killed 50 in the country. Tunisia's Prime Minister announced a freeze in public service hiring, citing a difficult economic situation aggravated by the pandemic and the lockdowns that have paralysed the economy. The government forecasts that the unemployment rate in Tunisia will increase from 15% to 21.6% by the end of this year.
Today, professionals in the field are insisting on the particularity of the sector of health for the implementation of a specific reform for the medical sector. This law will provide a framework for all existing sectors to define the legislative procedures of interprofessional organizations and to organize salaries, bonuses, etc. During the COVID-19 crisis, there were only 2 or 3 professions that did not stop working and fulfill their responsibilities for the country. But as usual, we were the first for battle, but the last for recognition.
Women's groups in Nigeria held a protest against rising cases of rape. Demonstrators sang songs and wore T-shirts with messages in support of rape survivors. According to UNICEF, 1 in 4 Nigerian women are sexually abused before they turn 18. According to the United Nations office in the country, the majority of cases of sexual abuse in Nigeria are not prosecuted. South African working-class communities have continued to bear the brunt of the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the country's economy. In addition to cutting wages, a number of companies in the country have laid off or are in the process of laying off thousands of workers, allegedly due to financial difficulties caused by the pandemic. On Wednesday, clothing giant Edcon Group announced that it will lay off more than 22,000 of its workers. This Thursday, the South African Broadcasting Corporation notified unions of its intention to cut 600 jobs at its head office in Johannesburg. Health authorities have reported new COVID-19 cases in Morocco, bringing the total number to over 7,500 since the outbreak of the pandemic. 45 new COVID-19 cases were reported, while the death toll now stands at 202. Morocco's Ministry of Health also reported over 4,800 recoveries, which represents a recovery rate of 64.1%. Meanwhile, the Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention provided an update on COVID-19 figures in the African continent on Thursday. The total number of cases confirmed across the continent now stands at over 260,000, while there have been more than 7,000 fatalities and over 123,000 people have recovered from the virus. To mark the International Day of Yoga, which is celebrated on June 21st, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has recommended practicing yoga in order to help improve health in the face of the novel coronavirus.
Friends, the world is fighting a pandemic of monumental scale, but yoga provides multi-dimensional solutions to the multiple challenges COVID-19 has brought.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.